today we have a special guest, John Lockwood. He is an attorney who specializes in regulated industries such as gambling and cannabis. And we're going to take a deep dive into all things gaming today in Florida. Stick with us. You don't want to miss it. John Lockwood has forged new ground in Florida's gaming practices.
You know, I'm still of the opinion that the state could enact slot machine legislation if they wanted to, you know, even under the Voter Control Act.
You're listening to A Deeper Dive with Dara, a podcast by City and State, Florida.
Hello and welcome to A Deeper Dive with Dara Cam. Today, that's me, I'm Dara Cam, and today I am joined by a special guest, John Lockwood. He is the OG of OGs of regulatory law in Florida, and he actually cut his teeth, I believe, on gambling law. He's also the kind of king of cannabis litigation, regulatory, not litigation. He's the king of cannabis. Let's just call him the king of cannabis in Florida. He's laughing. Hey, John, welcome back. Thanks for joining me.
Glad to be here, Dara. Always excited.
John, we got to know each other. It's probably 15 years ago when you were working on
Greyhound tax credits.
There we have
and
it.
Decoupling.
That's right, yeah. Decoupling, and the Greyhound tax credits, decoupling, and you also, I don't want to say exploit because that sounds pejorative, but you also took advantage of what was considered to be a loophole in Florida law and got a summer highlight permit for one of your clients. Tell me about the whole let me start by saying I used to think that gambling was the most backstabbing, industry with, I won't say sketch players, but it was the most competitive, backstabbingest industry until I started covering weed. And then I decided, so now I kind of flip back and forth. But tell us a little bit about how you got your start in gambling and how you became the king of gambling law.
Well, that's very kind of you to suggest that. I've been blessed to have great clients, that have, entrusted me to kind of help navigate through this. I'm not really a litigator. I've kind of always just kind of pegged myself as a legal strategist of sorts, not everything can be solved by going to the legislature or filing a lawsuit. A lot of times there's, other things at play. And so,
like reading the statutes, maybe.
Yeah, the summer highlight you mentioned was a fun one for me because I had a client that had a summer highlight permit, and always, and I think a lot of people in the industry at that time had always felt that permit could be relocated in South Florida, and we started that process in 2009, 2010. We sought to relocate it to a new location and just, confirm that in fact the permit could move. And, the administration at that time at DBPR were very cool on the subject. They did not want to see the permit relocate. They took a pretty hard stance at that. And so I had to go back to the drawing board with the client as to, how we were going to effectuate their goals and what they were looking to achieve. And I just started, I read the statute on summer highlight, and really the first time when I read through it, I said, well, wait a second, it says right here that there's a mechanism for creating a new permit. Why don't we just go get a new permit? And so I wrote them a memo and said, look, I think that instead of relocating the old permit, why don't we just, take these facts that we have here for, this statutory, criteria and apply for a new permit. And that's what we did. And it was a little bit easier than I thought to get the first one. The ones that came after that were much more difficult, I think, once the industry and the administration
and the regulators
once
wised
they saw,
up. Yeah.
It's had a profound impact on the South Florida, because it's allowed a lot of the operators that historically, had to engage in live racing activities, that wanted to get out of live racing activities. If, they followed that blueprint for obtaining those summer highlight permits, and they were able to switch over from live, racing, which was quite expensive, to have more, smaller venue highlight performances, and able to still meet their requirements and keep their slot machines and cardinal operations and things like that.
That's what I was going to say, is the reason for this was so beneficial is because it allowed them in South Florida to have slots, but and were there any where they could only just add poker rooms, or?
So that statute only applied in Broward and Dade County, but we do have one facility that's yet to be open in South Florida that would be a card room only facility, kind of in the downtown area of Miami. So and it was that's a summer highlight permit, and that authorization was obtained. So, but yeah, no slots there.
So I guess maybe not the king of gambling law, but a major player in gaming in Florida for many years. And I will tell you, listeners, that summer highlight permit brainchild of John Lockwood's was created a storm in gambling land. I don't have a word for gambling land.
So I think what made that one worse at the time was the permit was issued on a Friday, and on Monday, Mary Ellen Claus ran a story on the Miami Herald, but also on Monday, I think staff from Senate Regulated Industries at that time was doing a tour of DBPR and just talking about policy issues.
Right.
And so I just recall a lot of the staff members at the time saying this is getting a lot of attention.
It's a very competitive market, and when one of my first stories that I wrote for the news service, I was speaking to a former head of parimutuel wagering in Florida, and he told me that it's the only industry at that time it's the only industry where competitors care more about what the other guy doesn't get than what they get.
I think there's probably that perception, for sure. I think this industry's always been about, wanting to be able to move forward. We've had talks of gambling expansion for years and years and years. And, when we try to do it so many different ways, right? A lot of times it's impossible to get a bill passed at the legislature. And, a lot of times passing a bill at the legislature involves, all of these operators in Chapter 550 and 551 have some types of unique carve-outs, and they get, upset about what unique carve-outs may apply to someone else. And so, it's very rare that we can find something that everyone gets behind. The designated player
the
games.
horsemen.
Yeah, exactly.
They don't like what the breeders and the horsemen and the track owners are on opposite sides of the fence oftentimes.
Decoupling exactly was one of those, because it was it just going to be greyhound? And then you had the opposition to that where the horse, you had the horse operators, the tracks that, some of them wanted to get out of live racing. But then you had the groups that, the horse breeders that did not want to see that happen. They're partnering with the greyhound breeders, because the greyhound breeders, they don't want to see greyhounds go away.
Right.
So you have a lot of, dynamics of, different partners lining up to work on different initiatives. So.
And you have the kind of elephants in the room, and that's the Seminole tribe of Florida.
That is true. They're quite the elephant.
So we are in a state now. I saw a chart. There was a big story in the New York Times recently about sports betting and what DraftKings and FanDuel have done to introduce sports betting in a number of states. And they had a map of all the states where sports betting was legal. And Florida is a state where the New York Times...
Does it just have a question mark?
No, it had it as legal, and and it didn't even have an asterisk like, hasn't really been implemented yet. So the compact that gave the Seminoles the right to operate sports betting, and it's complicated with agreements with pari-mutuel operators. It got struck down by a judge in Washington, D.C. that is now at the appellate court in Washington, D.C. They haven't issued a final ruling on that. So I don't know what the state of sports betting is in Florida. We're not sure. There are questions about, I'm sure you have an opinion about this, whether it would require a constitutional amendment to authorize sports betting if it's not something that the Seminoles are deemed to be allowed to do. We have a constitutional amendment that requires voters to approve any expansion of what's called Class 3 gaming, which sports betting is a Class 3 game, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Where I was going is is Florida going to have sports betting? Despite what the New York Times map might say, are we going to have sports betting?
I honestly, I don't know. I really don't. I think that it's something that would be good for the state. I think it would be a nice added amenity for a lot of the operators throughout the state. It would certainly help a lot of the pari-mutuel operators. I know that the tribe certainly wants to have that authorization and that amenity to offer theirs. So, a lot of times though these things just aren't. There's just no clear, bright line. Is it right? Is it wrong? Is it authorized? Can it be authorized? I don't know. We'll have to see, what the outcome is of the appellate court and how they treat. I mean, if the appellate court comes back and says that no, all tribal gaming has to be, kind of on the four corners of the reservation, then, that presents a pretty big hurdle, I think, going forward for sports betting in the state of Florida when you overlay the Voter Control Act, the constitutional amendment that you mentioned, because I think that would make it, I don't want to say impossible at that point in time, but very difficult to see sports betting in a world after that. Except
in the absence of a constitutional amendment, I
think that's be very difficult.
I gotcha.
I think that'd be very difficult. It's we've got all the issues with signature gatherers now, the 60% threshold. We've got a Supreme Court that is, giving kind of an enhanced scrutiny to these amendments. I mean, it takes a lot of money to run one of those initiatives,
right.
And then is the ROI, going to be there for them on the back end of that? Because when you run a constitutional amendment, it still needs to be implemented by the legislature. So you have to have someone that's willing to spend, $50, $100 million, and then hope that they're actually able to get what they want from the legislature in a meaningful fashion. I mean, look at the slots referendum in South Florida when they passed slots, and then the legislature set the tax rate at 50%. Operators said, I can't open that. I'm just not going to open.
Right. And they also put a limit on the number of, didn't they put a limit on the number of machines they could have?
Yeah, there is a limit on the number of machines, but it was certainly the tax.
It was the tax
that was the problem for getting people.
It's been a perennial issue, lowering that tax rate, which they did lower to 35%, didn't they?
Yeah, we're down to 35% now. So, we have 8 operational facilities now. So,
and it's difficult for the pari-mutuel operators because they're competing with the Seminoles, who, of course, now are not paying the state anything for their operations.
Yeah, their marginal tax rate under the compact is substantially less than what the parimutuel operators, would pay. So
Yeah.
they certainly have a significant advantage, especially in that market area down there. It's very difficult to compete against, the Hard Rock. And they have the other amenities as well, banked games. They were hoping to get craps and roulette. We'll see. I guess that's kind of held up in this, the compact. If they're able to get craps and roulette too, with that added benefit, I mean, pretty easy for patrons to just drive past,
right,
a facility to go to the Hard Rock. I mean,
yeah.
it is what it is. I mean,
yeah. Thanks for joining us. We'll be right back with John Lockwood to explore all things gaming in Florida.
Here at Deeper Dive, we want to hear from you, the listeners. We invite you to send your questions, comments, and feedback to our mailbag. You can reach us at deeperdive@cityandstatefl.com. That's deeperdive@cityandstatefl.com. Get your 2 cents in by sending us an email.
Welcome back to A Deeper Dive with Dara. We also in Florida, I still need to come up with a catchphrase for gambling land. We have a new gaming commission. And so that has kind of changed the landscape a little bit for gaming operators in Florida. Can you talk a little bit about the impact that the gaming commission has had?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that we've necessarily seen an impact yet from that, I think that from my perspective, I don't dislike the concept of the gaming commission. I think that, what we're going to see over time is that we'll probably need to tweak some of the underlying laws that they're, charged with enforcing in order to create something that's more workable in a gaming commission. And kind of what I mean with that is that, when you look at states that are traditionally that have gaming commissions, Vegas, Nevada, things of that nature, they have very robust investigative staff. So,
right.
When people are coming in and they're looking to acquire a facility, there's a lot of due diligence that they do on the backgrounds of the individuals and things like that we don't really have those type of issues in the state of Florida. In Chapter 550 and 551, there's just not a lot of discretionary things that come up that would be, suitable for a vote of a 5-member gaming commission, if that makes sense. Most of the things in 550 are either allowed or it's not allowed. Now, occasionally we certainly get some, some
designated player.
Yeah, I mean, there was that, and maybe that would have went differently, under a gaming commission. But, luckily for the industry, that I think that is now pretty solidified. That's carved out in 849 for the operators. I mean, something like that may have been, something that might have been better suited for a gaming commission.
So do you think that gaming is sort of on the decline in Florida now, or is it past its heyday? And if so, what can be done or what should be done to juice it?
We've certainly been a little stagnant with legislative initiatives and things because of the constitutional amendment. As to, we talked before about the turnover at the legislature and things like that. I think we're going to get to a point where, we have new legislators that take a fresh look at things, maybe initiatives that, failed years ago. It may be their time. I think of like online poker.
Mm-hmm.
We had a time in Florida where, online poker wasn't really regulated or authorized at the federal level, but it wasn't really prohibited, and so we had a lot of operators out there. And that online poker is really a good example because you would think, that it would compete with our brick and mortar poker facilities,
right.
But it really doesn't. Like poker players are, they naturally, they want to play in a live environment. So an online market, allows newer players to get used to, comfortable, things like that. But at the end of the day, where they want to be is at a brick and mortar facility that they can go and play in. And we don't.
So it won't cannibalize existing.
It doesn't really cannibalize. I think it's kind of an incentive, for them, and it's a good accessory for them.
You can
again,
get more people interested in it, and then you'll get more foot traffic.
I think so. Yeah, you get people that when you can play online when you're a new player. Maybe you're not quite ready to go sit down at a table with players. But if you can play online, I think that they develop their confidence, and it's very much a game of skill for them. A lot of people, very intellectual people, love to play poker, and they like to do it in that environment. And so I think that the having it in an online fashion is just very beneficial for the industry, and I think it could be a good revenue maker for the state. It's not, it doesn't infringe upon the Voter Control Act because poker is not a Class 3 game.
Right.
It could be authorized by the legislature. It could benefit the existing facilities, generate tax revenue. We've got other states that have already been doing this for years, so there's plenty of roadmaps out there for how to do that. So that's certainly one thing that the state could take a look at and would help.
What about the designated player games? I mean, they were a big issue with the Seminoles several years ago, and they actually are the reason why the Seminoles aren't paying the state, like, I don't know, $350 million a year or however much it was for them to have exclusive rights to banked games. A judge found the designated player games violated the statute, and
Violated the compact.
The compact, sorry. And Governor Scott at the time reached an agreement with the tribe and did not appeal that decision.
That's right.
So we have had different administrations or different administrative leaders have taken different approaches to the designated player games. What's the status of that now, and are we going to see any changes in that arena?
I don't think we're going to see any changes now. When they passed the compact legislation, it included some parameters for the play of designated player games in parimutuel facilities. Facilities that are in counties with slot machines, they can have less of these games than facilities that are, located outside of those areas. And that really kind of tends to, if you're close to a tribal facility, then if you're in that market area, then you're limited to, a certain number of these games. I don't really think that we'll see much in the way of any changes on those games. I think everyone's just kind of accepted, that controversial time has passed at this point in time. And let's be real, they never really were a competitive issue for the tribe. It was the fact that, did it violate the compact? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, but it didn't mean that it was in violation of state law. I mean, there's a lot of things that can be done under state law, but would also violate the compact at the same time. And that just happened to be one of that. And I recognize that, full well going into, what we were doing at the time. But, it was a unique time in the industry. We had, legislation, going on. It was pre-Voter Control Act.
Right.
I saw that there was a significant upside to, an operator being able to utilize these games. I mean, we knew that we were never going to get the legislature to allow blackjack or table games at these facilities, but looking at other jurisdictions that had, kind of similarities to the state of Florida, this is something that, one, I thought would be a good complement, to what we have here. And also, the way that 849-086 was written, there was an opportunity to do that. And so we came up with a strategy and rolled it out.
How did you come up with that idea?
I mean, I wouldn't say that I came up with the idea. I mean, there were operators that were playing some form of these type of games in, 2010, 2011 at that point, but it was usually, a table here, a table there. It wasn't really well organized. And then I had a client that, we were talking about, how we wanted to move some things forward and some ideas that we would have after, I think this was the conclusion of the 2012 legislative session. And so I said, look, I mean, let's just roll this game out. We won't ask for approval. We'll invite the state to come in and give us an administrative complaint or some order that would, shut the game down, and then we can litigate it. And I fully expected that game was rolled out on like a Friday night. I fully expected by, the next week we'd have an administrative complaint, and it never came.
Right.
And then and ironically, for about 2 years, nothing happened. There were 1 or 2 tables at this room that were operating, and it was,
it was on the down low.
It was a tense time. I mean, it was kind of this. It was controversial. The state would talk about it, and then we had a rulemaking session for card rooms, and ultimately it was some parameters were put in place.
I was at that. Yeah. That was that the one where things got really ugly, and
No,
that was really jam packed.
So we had or before that in 2014, we had it was almost a non-event. I mean, there was litigation, I think, at that point. Again, that's 8 years ago.
Yeah,
I don't remember exactly all the proceedings, but
hey, wait till you're my age.
We had an opportunity, and a rule was conceived with the regulator that would allow these games to function, and then away we went. And I think that's probably it's probably $100 million a year industry now, across the state. I mean, everybody, quickly kind of, saw the potential of that, afterwards. It took a few, operators a little while to get going, but, it's been a great thing for the state. No real problems, anything like that. So, as far as I don't see it as being controversial anymore.
Okay. Well, I will take your word for it. You're the expert. I certainly am not. And anything in gambling land that you'd like to talk about? What are you working on? Anything that you've got cooking that we should know about, or that you don't want us to know about?
Yeah. I mean, I got a few things, that are kind of we're working on right now and looking at. I think we'll see. I mean, will we have any opportunities in the legislature? Now we talk about, we've got new people. I think that it's potential a time for some debates on things. I mean, I'm still of the opinion that the state could enact slot machine legislation if they wanted to. Even under the Voter Control Act. The Voter Control Act is specific to the game type, but beyond that, that's what it really calls for. So we have a statewide vote on this type of gaming activity. I don't think it necessarily compels that vote to be held every single time, because you got to think that the constitutional amendment, it's a restriction on the legislature, and their ability. It's a restriction on the administration, and I think that restriction has to be kind of narrowly construed. When you start talking about separation of powers, and
we haven't seen any challenges.
There haven't really been any challenges to that. There were some talks of the legislature to do a sports betting bill, and I think sports betting probably falls squarely within that. But slots. Again, we've had a statewide referendum on slots. I see no reason why the legislature could not now go and enact slot machine legislation if they wanted to.
I thought the statewide referendum on slots was to allow slots in Broward and Miami-Dade.
It is, but that's what I'm saying is that the Voter Control Act is game specific. I don't think the Voter Control Act would require you every single time you wanted to enact any type of policy changes on these games that you would have to go back through a citizens initiative every single time. I think once the state has voted to allow slot machines within the state, I think so. Again, because you have to look at the Voter Control Act as being a restriction on their ability, and I don't think you can read the Voter Control Act to be this expansive.
I'm sure Norm Brayman won't agree with you on that.
That's fine. Norm probably wouldn't agree with me on a lot of things regarding gambling policy, but it'll
be interesting then. Do you think that the legislature would move forward with that?
I have no idea. That's not within my wheelhouse.
Right. So your area is to figure out if they can do it or not.
I just come up with ideas.
You are the idea man. All right. You're the idea man and the fix-it man. John Lockwood, OG in weed and gambling, my good friend for many years. Thank you so much for joining us in the Terracotta Room today.
I'm very honored to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
A Deeper Dive with Dara is a podcast by City and State Florida, hosted by Dara Cam, produced by Ryan Daly, and music for the podcast was recorded by Periodic Labs, LLC, and performed by Ryan Daly and Danny Reyes.